in 1314, the war for the throne of Scotland came to a bloody conclusion on the fields of Bannockburn as Robert the Bruce unleashed an absolute military masterclass against the might of the Kingdom of England. The crown of Scotland had been a hot topic since the late 13th century with no clear line of succession, and King Edward I of England was asked to step in and mediate so civil war wouldn't break out between the rival claimants, and even when John Balliol was placed on the throne, Edward maintained that Scotland was a vassal state of England, much to the Scottish displeasure, and that they should still provide funds and troops for his wars in France. By 1304, after numerous revolts and rebellions including William Wallace's, Edward had finally subdued his noisy neighbours, with Wallace executed the very next year. However, the very next year after that, a claimant to the Scottish throne, Robert the Bruce, murdered another claimant to the Scottish throne, John Comyn, over disputes over loyalty to Edward, and now the Bruce crowned himself King of the Scots, and rebellion was once again on the cards. Despite trying to root out Bruce and forcing him into exile, he soon returned with his rebellion growing as he won magnificent victories over the English on the battlefield, such as at Loudon-Hill, as well as making things better for him. Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, died en route to a campaign to Scotland in 1307, leaving the throne of England in the less than capable hands of his son, Edward II. Edward didn't have the same vigour as his father for the wars in Scotland, nor much support from his nobles due to his increasing favouritism of his friend, Piers Gaveston, allowing Bruce to consolidate his lands in Scotland against the remaining Comyn supporters before launching a devastating guerrilla war on English-held castles and raids across the border. Many English-held castles in Scotland soon fell to the Scottish, and in 1313 Bruce's brother laid siege to the crucial castle of Stirling, which controlled the route north into Scotland, and due to its massive defences and the castle following the medieval principle, if you build up high, you're getting some fi, it was due to be a long and protracted siege. So the castle commander said to the Scottish, "If I haven't been relieved by the English in a year, you can have the castle." England was on the verge of civil war though, due to Edward's favouritism of Gaveston and Gaveston's subsequent execution by the nobles. However, through negotiation, crisis was averted and funds were freed up for Edward, along with a few continental loans, allowing Edward to take the war back to the Scottish. Edward put an absolutely huge army into the field, numbering around 20,000 troops, which included 2,500 heavy cavalry. However, many of the earls were still estranged with Edward over Gaveston sending only the minimum amount of troops required by law, as they stated that this campaign wasn't agreed upon by Parliament, although it was, but they likely had more sinister motivations, as if Edward won in Scotland, he would then turn on them next. Nonetheless, the size of Edward's army shouldn't have been an issue, as contemporaries noted that even if the whole of Scotland gathered, they still wouldn't have been able to stop it, as he set off from the border town of Berwick to relieve the siege at Stirling Castle. However, he only left himself a week before the castle was handed over to the Scots, pushing his army to exhaustion on the 90-mile route. In comparison, Bruce only had around 5,000 trained infantry, 2,000 to 3,000 more militia, and 500 light cavalry who paled in comparison to the English heavy cavalry, but they excelled in hit and run tactics. And he situated himself on the wooded plain near the Bannockburn stream, which flooded regularly, and on the marshy plain he dug potholes and ditches, making it treacherous underfoot for any advancing army, because Bruce knew the importance of the old medieval saying that went, "If you make ditches, you get bitches." The Scottish forces were split into 4 schiltrons, a hedgehog of spears which required immense discipline in order to be able to be used effectively, and they controlled the route towards Stirling Castle. And to begin with, the English cavalry advanced over the bridge as the schiltrons positioned themselves in the protection of the woodland. As the English were waiting for reinforcements, one English knight, Sir Henry de Bohun, spotted Robert the Bruce ahead of his forces, scouting and lightly armoured, and he charged at him single-handedly. And instead of hiding within his wall of spears, Robert the Bruce stood his ground, dodging at the last second before splitting de Bohun's head in 2 with an axe. The Scottish schiltrons pursued the English vanguard back across the river, slaughtering many in the process, before Bruce pulled them back before they lost cohesion, all while a second English contingent of cavalry crossed further upstream to try and scout the situation at Stirling Castle. This, however, was spotted, with the Scottish moving a schiltron unit to deal with it, and the English, not wanting to back down from a fight, were absolutely slaughtered on the Scottish spears as their cavalry charges against them failed again and again and again. And at the end of day 1, despite the 2 English losses, they still held a numerical superiority over the Scottish. Scottish morale was through the roof, and during the night a Scottish knight fighting for the English deserted over to Robert the Bruce, telling him that English morale was through the floor, they were exhausted and he should attack the next morning. All while in the English camp, they were arguing whether they should postpone the battle and rest their troops, which was met by traitorous accusations by King Edward II. The next day the Bruce did attack the English force who had now crossed the river in a surprise attack, as they didn't expect him to leave his defensive position, and like Wallace's victory at Stirling in 1297, the English were now packed in against the river, unable to escape, and it was an absolute slaughter, with King Edward II having to be dragged from the battlefield. The English had lost over half their army, with around 1,000 knights killed and captured, and Stirling Castle was taken and then razed to the ground so it wouldn't be retaken by the English, and the victory all but secured Scottish independence from the English. For a while.